Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. It's good to be back after our summer recording hiatus. Humans have pumped 1.6 trillion tons of carbon dioxide into the air since 1750 when the Industrial Revolution began. And we're adding another 40 billion tons every year. Even with dramatic emissions reductions, we're still on track to blow past the Paris Accords 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming limitation, which we first actually breached in 2024. Our guest today is Dr. Julio Friedmann. He's spent his career at the intersection where these massive challenges collide with the capabilities of current technology. Julio is the chief scientist at Carbon Direct, a carbon management company that works with Fortune 500 organizations like Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase, and American Express to turn their net zero commitments into science-backed action plans. Julio developed his expertise in direct air capture and carbon storage technologies on an unusual career path that began as a researcher at ExxonMobil and includes service at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Columbia University's Energy Policy Center, and a stint running advanced energy programs in the Obama administration's Department of Energy. As companies work to meet 2030 and 2050 carbon goals, the question isn't whether we will have massive carbon removal, it's whether we can deploy it fast enough and fairly enough to matter. We'll explore the best investments to accelerate the path, not just to net zero, but beginning to actually draw down that 275 years of industrial emissions that's necessary to bring the climate back into the sweet spot, environmentally and climate speaking, for human prosperity. You can learn more about Carbon Direct's work at carbon-direct.com. We're going to get to the conversation right after a brief commercial break. Stay tuned. Welcome to the show, Julio. How you doing today?
I'm doing fabulously. Thank you.
Well, great to have you here. Thank you so much. I'm really impressed with what Carbon Direct does. It works on such a vast range of projects, but can you briefly explain the Carbon Direct approach to supporting a company's carbon management goals?
Absolutely. Ultimately, the world is people doing things. We help people do things. And specifically, we bring deep technical expertise to these very challenging problems. Our only goals are real, valid reductions of emissions, removals of emissions, and make and clean products. And we bring our scientific expertise to help our clients and customers make those real.
You have a team of 70 scientists. You're doing a lot of very interesting work, and your background at Exxon and the Department of Energy and so forth gives you a unique perspective on where we are in the progress toward restoring the environment. How would you characterize where the United States is today in terms of that progress and its commitment to climate change?
So, the United States is not one thing. The United
Mhm.
States is many things. At the national level, we are retreating.
Mhm.
No doubt about that. We are, in fact, worse than that. We are surrendering advantages that we have as a country at the national level. We are surrendering our leads in technology development and innovation and science. We are abandoning market opportunities that could position us better for competitiveness. So it goes. At the state level, many different stories, actually.
Mhm.
At the case of California, California continuing to put money to work and, generally speaking, pushing hard on climate reductions and removals. There's important legislation that's coming forward this year, for example, SB 643 as
Mhm.
one example, which is aimed at sort of setting targets and spending money on removals. You could also look at a state like Texas and say, well, the policies in the state are weird, but the state's leading on solar, it's leading on wind, it's doing a bunch of interesting things.
Well,
It's
and that's what's so unique about this moment is that we, on the
yes.
one hand, have this kind of political discussion about this. On the other, there is a great deal of progress, and as you point out, a lot of money to be made in the long run by getting to a green regenerative economy.
One of the ways in which Carbon Direct views the world in this context is we view what our customers are doing as well. And in general, companies are not backing down, they're doubling down, they're doing
Yeah.
more. And if they can deploy renewables to save money, or if they can deploy carbon capture to reduce their emissions, or if they can buy clean products for their corporate reporting, they're going to do it. And we're seeing actually growing sophistication in their
Mhm.
purchases. We are seeing growing commitments in terms of money. They are adding ambition in terms of the range of things they're taking on. And all of that's happening in the United States too.
How does that scientific firepower that you bring to those discussions change the conversations with these companies? Are you able to give them the hard feedback that not enough is being done to preserve their markets and supply chains and the revenue that they depend on today? And how do they react to that?
So let's start by saying we don't use the scientific expertise to give them that message. They already
Okay.
have that message.
Do they really get it, or are they
No, they really get
gesturing
it.
towards a future?
So no, they really get it. And when I say they, I mean many different
Hmm.
kinds of customers in many different kinds of sectors. Let's start with a fairly obvious thing. Most of these companies are not really US companies, they're really multinational
Right.
companies. So they have to work in Japan, they have to work in Europe, they have to abide by all the laws in these countries.
Hmm.
Second of all, most of them are making long-term investments. They're making investments for a 20 or a 30-year horizon, which means they can't be thinking about short-term politics at all. They really have to be thinking about how do we avoid losing money over that kind of an
Exactly.
arc? Where is the market going to go? They all believe that clean markets are their future, and so they can't just abandon that as a matter of sensibility. They have to sort of think about what is prudent investment. This is actually where the scientific firepower of a company like Carbon Direct is useful. They could say, hey, we need to buy sustainable aviation fuels. Great.
Hmm.
What's a good one? How do we know what a good sustainable aviation fuel is? If the politics in Europe change and if the policies in Europe change, are we going to suddenly have bad fuel? How do we
Yeah.
hedge against the future? How do we know that the supply chain for sustainable aviation fuels is sustainable? That they're
Hmm.
not destroying land upstream or causing water problems? There's actually very cheap technical stuff on all of these topics. How do you think about getting clean fuels? How do you think about what is a valid and durable removal of greenhouse gases?
Hmm.
What's the best investment to reduce the most emissions? A levelized cost of carbon abatement kind of sensibility. That actually requires real in-depth expertise. If you're going to decarbonize an existing asset, if you're going to enter a new market, you need more than just marketology, you need the science too.
Well, we recently had the X Prize carbon removal team on the show, and they were announcing the winners of their $100 million contest. And their solutions that dominated were those natural solutions like enhanced rock weathering and biochar. I'm wondering if we could just walk through a few of these technologies and get your opinion on them. So let's start with
Sure.
enhanced rock weathering. How significant is that as a potential lever in the fight against climate change?
Right. So before I say something, let me say something.
Sure.
Like any prize, the X Prize is designed. And
Hmm.
so the solutions they selected reflected the design of the prize. So,
Absolutely. Their process, and they called that out,
mhm.
did not really give the DAC companies as much time as they needed to achieve the same thing that the enhanced rock weathering did.
Not just time,
Mm.
I think quite reasonably, the prize people said, hey, we want something that can scale, and we want something that
Mhm.
can scale quickly, and we want something that can scale at modest cost.
Yeah.
And that was part of the design as well. In that context, enhanced rock weathering would score well. So
Right.
let's talk about ERW, enhanced rock weathering, as a thing.
Hmm.
So, for starters, like I'm glad that this technology is finally having a moment. It's been kind of underloved for a long time. We've known that we could grind up minerals and put them on land and get a bunch of benefits out of it, including climate benefit. We've known that for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, what has become clear now is that there's a market that did not exist 10 years ago to actually pay for this. That's part of the reason it's sort of burst on the scene on the last couple of years. One of the things that we have learned is that it can have a big impact at modest cost and it could scale quickly around the world. Part of the reason why is because it makes use of existing infrastructure. Quarry with grinding material, you already got 90% of what you need. If you have something that spreads fertilizer on the field, you have kind of the rest of it. And we already have these things in most places. There's things that we are also learning as we go that shouldn't surprise anyone either. One, not all minerals are created equal. Not all basalts are created equal. I was interested in looking at a set of projects in sub-Saharan Africa. The company involved looked at 8 different basalt quarries and found out that only one of them would deliver any abatement.
Really, I'm curious why
It's the
the
nature of the
chemical
rocks.
composition of the salt.
The composition of the basalt and actually the structure of the basalt as well.
Really?
Basalts, when they first erupt, are glass, and glass reacts more rapidly. After a very short period of time, it actually forms microminerals, which react more slowly.
Hmm.
But there's also the composition of the basalt, how much iron and magnesium is really in it. And these are not all created equal either. So there's a volume and a time dependency in just the mineral feedstocks. And you can get perhaps better production of removals through something like olivine, but olivine is much more scarce. And even then, what kind of olivine is it? Phosphorite or phthalate? Is it, like what other minerals are in there with it? So even just at the very most basic level, we're learning stuff. Second thing we're learning is it's really hard to monitor.
Hmm.
The X Prize people didn't really take that fully into their consideration, but a corporate buyer does.
Sure.
Corporate buyer is like, well, how do we know this has been delivered?
Right. And so by contrast, direct air capture, which you measure in terms of the tonnage of CO2 captured, is very material. You can measure that, interestingly, compared to rock.
Right.
When you think about that as an abatement strategy for a client, do
Mhm.
you then do a blend of these options in their plan, or what's the criteria for putting together a solution for a Microsoft or a JP Morgan?
Sure. So let's start by saying that 96% of what's in the market we consider to be not high quality,
Hmm.
right? And again, that's the science speaking. And we have very clear reasons why we believe that. Every year we publish a status on voluntary carbon markets, and we have a conclusion about what's in there. We also publish every year with Microsoft criteria for what are quality, just so that
Hmm.
people understand what we're talking about. In that context, again, our buyers are quite sophisticated. So for a very large company, it could be a tech company, it could be a bank, it could be an investment company, it could be a government. In any of these cases, these guys will say a couple of things repeatedly. One, we want to manage risk. We want to make sure that the thing we're doing has value,
Hmm.
period. And so things like the monitoring technology become really important. So they might be interested in enhanced rock weathering, but even though it's cheap and scalable, they're like, well, we don't want to put everything into that. There's risks.
Hmm.
So they want to manage risk. That's reputational risk, that's performance risk, that's contract risk. The second thing they're saying is we want to manage costs. Direct air capture is awesome for a whole bunch of reasons. I've written and spoken lovingly about that for a long time. Cost is not one of them. Super
Right.
expensive. So you get clarity, but cost is a challenge. The other thing that they will say is we want to make sure it has impact, not just climate impact. We want companies to grow. We want there to be new jobs. We want there to be many kinds of options for us in the future. And so they will always say, can you bring us a portfolio of stuff?
Hmm.
And there will be portfolios across the different things. So enhanced rock weathering, biomass, biochar, other kinds of mineralization, direct air capture. Usually they'll say, hey, can we also have trees in there? We like trees. Can we have mangroves? Can we have soils? What are the
Yeah.
things that we can do? They will also have multiples within each of those. They're like, we don't
Mhm.
want just one biochar company. That exposes us to risk. We want to
Right.
have multiple kinds of biochar, multiple geographies, multiple conversion technologies, so that in the future we know we'll have the thing we need.
Now, you mentioned biochar and biomass. Where do you think they are in terms of the development of the necessary capacity and efficiency that we're looking for?
Right. So, first of all, pretty good. I'm just going to
Okay.
give you the like. It's pretty good. It's pretty good on a lot of fronts. One, it's pretty good on durability. If you
Hmm.
do biochar correctly, you can have more than 200 years durability with confidence. Second, pretty good in terms of sustainability. There's a lot of waste biomass out there that you can turn into biochar, and it's a
Mhm.
relatively well understood technology. Um, Pretty good on cost. It sort of falls in between the costs of something like trees and direct air capture. And we're starting to now scale production in a useful way. I will say that, like everything else, there's hair on biochar. There's questions about durability and how you measure it. There's questions about how you monitor this stuff. The machines that make biochar are kind of finicky. They break a lot. So, I do actually get the supply in the field.
Right.
I think all of these technologies end up filling in a particular kind of gap. It's part of the reason why we think it's useful to have a broad portfolio and why most of our customers buy a broad portfolio. They want something that everybody's got.
Do you see direct air capture on a cost curve that will resemble other advanced technologies, or are we still struggling to find that catalyst for true scalability?
Yes, I do. I do see us on a trajectory of price reduction and profound price reduction and profound price reduction in a reasonable time frame. So I will start by saying this industry was unduly optimistic about how
Mhm.
quickly they could scale and how quickly the cost will come down. Most groups have increased their cost estimates with reason.
Every startup industry goes through this. We lived with the hype. Now we have to get to the reality. What is
Correct.
the reality?
So the reality today is we're still in sort of 400 to $1,000 per ton. That's really the range. We're
Hmm.
going to have a real clear signal enter the market shortly, and that is when the Stratos project turns on. This is the 1.5 project in No Trees, Texas,
Hmm.
and the town of No Trees is very happy to have this project. That's going to come in at a surprisingly low cost for many people. They're going to, and I don't know the exact cost, and I don't want to share contractual information and stuff, but it's going to be way below 1,000. It's going to be
Okay.
much more at the price that people were like, oh, well, that's kind of in bounds, and it's still the first of a kind. So even the first of a kind project is going to come in at an interesting cost range. Second of all, when I say a reasonable time frame, what I mean is like by 2040, I think there's good reason to believe we will be well below $300 a ton.
Given that price, what volume do you think we can reasonably expect to draw down using DAC?
I'm still optimistic that by the end of this decade, we will be in the million ton a year range.
Okay.
We can probably be well beyond that. I'm cautiously optimistic we can have 2 million tons of active direct air capture running by the end of this decade. By 2040, at that kind of a price range, contingent on a gazillion things, blah, 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 let's say 50 to 100 million tons.
So
So,
a long way from where we need to be. How do we accelerate that? Do you have thoughts on
yes, this is what I call Ohm's law of finance. Money is like voltage, it overcomes resistance.
that?
The question is entirely who pays.
Yeah.
And we are seeing the foundations of the who pays questions in a rational context.
Hmm.
So, couple of examples. One of them, SB 643, that I just mentioned a moment ago.
The California law. Yeah.
The California law, it will set a target and it will provide money.
Hmm.
Great. Like that's a good way to do it. You must have 2% of the emissions by the state, and we will provide $50 million dollars a year as a starting point. And we will include direct air capture in that. Will all $50 million dollars go to direct air capture? No, 100% not. It will go to many different kinds of things. But that's not chump change. That's like a reasonable purchase. We've already seen companies like Airbus and Microsoft and JP Morgan make large purchases for direct air capture. So we're seeing this kind of stuff. The most important piece is actually around a compliance market. So something like Corsia, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, they have a standard for emissions for aviation. 170 countries have signed. We are facing a 100 million ton shortfall by 2030. Okay? It's a mandate. Thou shalt. At that point, the question is, what can you buy? And they'll be
Yeah.
buying some trees, they'll be buying some bioenergy, they'll be buying sustainable aviation fuels, and they'll still have a 50 million ton shortfall. So how these things get incorporated into compliance markets will start to answer the who pays question.
So we don't need a silver bullet. We need a quiver of solutions.
It's always the case.
Yeah.
There, there,
One more technology I'd love to learn a little more about your thoughts on is ocean alkalinity enhancement, which has been very controversial. The
Mhm.
idea of seeding the ocean with various chemicals. There's been experiments that cause the bloom of algae that draws
Mhm.
down CO2.
Right. So you just described two very different things,
Oh,
actually.
I'm sorry.
One of them is ocean iron fertilization.
Yeah.
Okay. Iron fertilization is not ocean alkalinity enhancement,
Hmm.
but it is still an attempt to harness natural systems to draw down greenhouse gases.
Hmm.
The challenge with iron fertilization is it doesn't work. We've actually run a bunch of tests. It
Didn't
doesn't
know
do the
this.
job. It does cause algae to bloom.
Hmm.
We see the algae blooms immediately. What it does not do is draw down CO2. Those algae stay in the upper ocean. They don't sink. So what they all you end up doing is having a lot of air surface ocean exchange of greenhouse gases.
Okay, so there might be some more fish eating the algae, but other than that, we don't get much benefit.
Correct. Now, if the goal is to feed whales, awesome. If the goal is to draw down CO2, not so much. And again, there should be more experiments on this. We should keep working it. I am always in the position that we should learn more before we make categorical announcements of stuff. But so far, iron fertilization, it is controversial with good reason, but it also doesn't work. So we don't have to work on it a lot. In contrast, ocean alkalinity enhancement is quite different. Think about it like putting a big Tums in the ocean.
Hmm.
What you're typically doing is adding either carbonate or bicarbonate. Now, this is much less controversial. First of all, because the ocean has so much bicarbonate in it already that you can't move the needle in terms of natural systems. You can't perturb the natural system in a realistic way. So you end up focusing on sort of what are the local consequences of what you're doing. Also, most people don't even understand what bicarbonate is. So when you're like, oh, you're taking a dissolved ion, like they glaze over immediately. They're like, oh, like come back to me later. Mostly what you're talking about here is, in fact, stuff like grinding up minerals of various kinds that have a high alkalinity content and adding them to the ocean where they dissolve, and that pulls CO2 out of the air. It's actually, if I were a mad scientist and I were saying, how would I fix this problem? This is exactly how I would do it. I would say, let's grind up a bunch of stuff and put it in the ocean. It will be cheap, it's scalable, it's fast. Big problem with ocean alkalinity enhancement, it's illegal. The London Convention prohibits dumping in the ocean. Right now, you can't do it.
Well, in that case, though, if it is a local intervention,
Mhm.
why should it be illegal? Uh, who
Right.
would regulate? Who could possibly regulate it?
So if you dump it in the open ocean, it's illegal. In order for ocean alkalinity enhancement to scale, that's what you need to do. You
Hmm.
could today do this in territorial waters. So you can do
Okay.
this within the first 200 kilometers of a continental shelf in most countries or something. There, though, immediately you run into reasonable concerns. And when I say reasonable concerns, most people have a deep attachment to the ocean. They are very emotionally bound to it. And it's not just that they like whales, it's a primordial kind of sensibility. And the first question that people will ask is, we've screwed up the air, are we going to fix it by screwing up the ocean? And it's hard to counter that argument. You end up if your response to that is, well, we're going to talk about carbonate chemistry, like immediately people are like, why are you doing this really? And so the right answer in the near term is to help companies do pilots, to really instrument the hell out of these things so that we learn everything we need to learn, that you have a relatively transparent data sharing kind of sensibility around it, that environmental management agencies are engaged, etc. If you try, though, to educate communities and say, we're going to do this, the community will just shut you down. They were like, we don't want to be the
Yeah.
people who do this. We don't want this in our backyard. So activating is the hard part in ocean alkalinity enhancement.
We've laid a solid foundation for the rest of this conversation. We need to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. And we are back. I hope you enjoyed those commercials. Let's continue the conversation with Dr. Julio Friedmann. He is chief scientist at Carbon Direct. It's a carbon management firm that has partnered with companies like Microsoft, American Express, and others to develop carbon reduction strategies. Julio, Carbon management is an interesting term. Are we headed for a future in which, for lack of a better way of describing it, humanity manages global carbon levels like a planetary air conditioner? What is this industry's role in our future? How will we think about it?
A friendly modification here is a planetary thermostat
Okay.
is perhaps a better way to think about it. Let's start by saying we have a carbon problem. Here's an idea. Why don't we manage that?
Hmm.
Like we think of this commonly as an energy problem or as a money problem, but energy and money are not carbon. Too much CO2 in the atmosphere is the issue. We got to manage that. And we usually think about it exclusively as we got to reduce the amount of CO2 that goes into the air. It's like a rule of holes thing. That's not crazy, but it's not even the big problem. The big problem is we still have 1.7 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere and oceans that we didn't really mean to put there. Carbon management should be thought of in the same kind of sensibility as waste management. We no longer throw trash on the street. We no longer vent sewage into rivers. Like we actually manage those wastes because we understand the health implications of them. So we're really talking about a planetary health issue. And managing that is basically like managing a thermostat. We're like, well, we can at some point say, well, where do we want to put the dial? And we're far from that, but that's where we're going to end up.
When?
Oh, this is going to be like in a 2100 kind of time frame. We have to have a whole basket of technologies well assessed, well fielded. We have to have industries and money in place. Just to even manage the climate obligations we've already made, we need a CO2 removal industry that is twice as big as the oil and gas industry. Like,
Hmm.
it's going to take some time to build that and a lot of money.
Well, and your idea of the thermostat, I think, is apt because what we're talking about is thinking about carbon not as a linear problem, but as a circular problem. How do we keep it flowing through our environment in the
Hmm.
appropriate levels that we need it for our genetics sweet
Yes.
spot? On the path to that reality in 2100, the big challenge is going to be making and keeping promises in a transparent way. How does Carbon Direct address your clients' concerns about being perceived as greenwashing as they make progress towards something which is still an imperfect solution?
Right. I'm pleased to say that they really care about this. This
Hmm.
is not just some like corporate box checking thing. Like they really want to make sure they're doing the right thing, all of our customers. I can also add that they're not just thinking about this as reputational risk. They could get sued in a Dutch court.
Hmm.
There is new international law that suggests that this is a global obligation. So they are thinking about this in terms of legal as well as perception sort of things. Um, in that context, though, they also don't want to just like buy a certificate and say, well, these other people said it was fine. They really
Yeah.
want to understand and make sure they're doing the right thing. That's where the science comes in. So if let's say that they are reforesting part of the Congo, like they want to invest in a project where they create a new forest that didn't exist before. They want to make sure that it actually does the things it says it does,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
it doesn't impact communities negatively. Quite the opposite. They want it to impact communities positively. They want to make sure that it's durable. If they're buying a 30-year contract for trees, they better get 30 years of abatement. How do you know that? Like, so all these things like feed into it. But the same thing is true if they're buying bioenergy with CCS from a waste to energy facility in the Nordic countries. They're like, well, what's the real supply of this stuff? How long is it going to stay underground? What's a reasonable price to pay? And then to your question, what claims can we legitimately make against it?
So, what role does transparency and very clear storytelling play in talking about carbon in an environment where it has become a component of the culture war? I mean, it's about grounding us in progress and the opportunity for greater prosperity. How would you characterize that?
So, wonderful question. Thank you. Um, Let me say that carbon has become weaponized on both edges of the
Yeah.
dumbbell. Like, um, there are a huge number of organizations out there that are just waiting to hold people's feet to the fire, that are
Hmm.
willing to say, like, you stepped over this line, we're going to sue the pants off of you. Like, that's not going to build the world we want. There are also really terrible forces that are like, this is all a hoax. We don't need to spend any money on this. We just need more money and more energy for everybody. Like that's also wrong, like categorically wrong. So the good news is that the heavy lifting gets done in the middle of the dumbbell. Um, Most actors, and when I say most actors, I mean most governments, most investors, most corporations, they all want to do the right thing. They just don't know how. So they want transparency, but they want to use that transparency to good effect. They
Hmm.
don't want it to be gaping. They don't want this to be like a queryable ledger that will just lead to lawsuits all the time. But they really do want to make sure that the public is engaged, that the public is informed, that agencies can do their job avoiding bad outcomes. And so they want the right level of transparency. Even that is a scientific question. Like not only like what is the right stuff to share, like are you sharing biochemical data from soils as part of an enhanced rock weathering project? Like how do you do that really? Like what kind of stuff should you share?
How do you tell the story too?
How do you tell the story? But also, how do you even federate that data? How do you gather it? How do you share it in a way that everyone can use, that scientists can use, that environmental groups can use, that regulators can use? How do you even do that? That is also a deep technical question.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, these things are not about principles. They start with principles. That's the right way to start thinking about it. But very quickly, you need standards, you need protocols, you need data centers, you need all these things working together to do the job. And most groups, governments, investors, civil society, and corporations know that.
You've collaborated with Microsoft, as you mentioned earlier, to establish criteria for assessing the quality of carbon credits, and the most recent report was released in June. What criteria do you check to establish that the carbon credit is high quality in 2025?
Sure, we use six criteria, actually. Uh, First one is additionality. Is the purchase actually changing anything, or are you just lining someone's pocket?
Yeah.
You have to show that you're doing something that would not automatically happen in nature or not automatically happen in a market. Durability. Are you actually getting the thing you bought for the term you did? So if you're buying biochar for 300 years, will it actually last 300 years? If you're putting CO2 underground, is it going to stay there geologically forever, or are you going to leak it in some future? If you're buying forests, are they going to get chopped down in 10 years and or burned
Or
down in 10
burn. Yeah.
years? Uh, Third is monitoring against a baseline. Really important. So if you're doing a soil intervention, you need to measure the soils beforehand to know the carbon content, and then you need to monitor it to show that it's actually happening, right? So this is an important one. And if you don't have that monitoring against a baseline, you're kind of not doing anything. Use two that are not specific sort of scientific questions, but are important for quality. One of them is, are you causing environmental harms or are you creating environmental benefits? Like, you need to know that.
Yeah.
One of the challenges, for example, with enhanced rock weathering is there's a risk of ecotoxicity. You could be adding heavy metals to food and soils. Okay, nobody wants to do that and call it a quality removal. So you need to guard against that as well, and you want to make sure the farmers are maintained and supported and so forth. And then there's questions of sort of equity and justice. Are you adding environmental burdens to people who shouldn't have environmental burdens for whatever reason? So these are the kinds of criteria that we use to do that.
That kind of information is accessible for a large organization that can gather this
Mhm.
information and process it. Is this kind of carbon credit available to the typical consumer who might be seeing these pitches? I mean, our readers ask this question. I mean, is this true? Can I really make a difference? So can they?
So it is a question of the discerning buyer.
Hmm.
The short answer is yes, you can make a difference. Yes, you can get this stuff. Yes, you can figure it out. It is not easy. This is the reason our company exists, is because separating sense from nonsense is often hard. There's a lot of hip, slick, and jive stuff in the market, and people are like, "We have the best quality. Come to Rapid Eddy's, CO2 removal. Like this is the kind of thing that's out there. And it's if most people don't want to have to become a scholar to sort this out, um, any more than most people don't want to do this with their electricity either. They're like, can somebody
Mhm.
just tell me my electricity is clean and cheap? Like, then I'll buy it. So Uh, Two things that I should say. One, we have offerings. Carbon Direct has looked at hundreds of projects around the world. Out of those hundreds of projects around the world, we have selected what we think are the 30 best projects, and we make those available. We don't make those available to individuals today, like we don't have individual purchase capabilities on that portfolio. But if you're a small company, you want to buy 1,000 tons instead of 20 million tons, like you can come to us. We can help you out. There are also guides out there. There are now a whole bunch of organizations that rate projects that are basically like bond rating agencies. B Zero, Silvera are examples where they just go out there and say, like, we rank these things. So you
Mhm.
don't have to. If you want to know if this project is good or if this organization is good, then, or this platform is good, we have opinions. And you can go out there and look at those things.
There are a variety of industries where we know there's an immense problem: aviation, shipping, concrete, the
Mhm.
production of steel. Which of these sectors are going to depend more on carbon drawdown technologies than reduction in their initial impact? And
Sure.
what do you think the most promising solutions for them are?
So let's start by saying that all of them should be doing reductions for real,
Hmm.
and most of them are. If you're a steel company, you're looking at hydrogen, you're looking at bio coke as a reduction agent. If you're a shipping company, you're looking at e-methanol and biomethanol and ammonia. Like they're really looking at all these things as reductions first. And that's good because that does two things. One, it gives them control over their supply chains and their products. And two, it allows them to make good decisions. The fact that they're educating themselves on this allows them to start comparing these things realistically. None of these companies, I should repeat, none of these companies have come to us and say, we just want to buy a bunch of cheap credits and get on with business as usual. Like no one's doing that.
Not just checking the box, it's making a difference.
Well, but not just that, they all know that this is part of their future.
Yeah.
They can't dodge this bullet. It's coming their
Hmm.
way. So they
Hmm.
just want to make sure that they are educated and capable, that they have the teams in place to make smart decisions, that they put the internal corporate policies in place to gather the money and make smart investments. Like they just want to do all this stuff. I think that there are going to be a bunch of industries where they have to do removals to balance the books. They just have to. I think aviation is a good example of this. They will buy as much sustainable aviation fuel as the world has that is good, and maybe that will cover 30%. Maybe it will cover 50%, but it will never cover 100%. At some point, also, sustainable aviation fuels are like $2,000 a ton for abatement. They're really expensive. At
Hmm.
some point, they're like, why are we spending $2,000 a ton? Direct air capture is already $600 a ton. Let's do that instead. We'll save some money. Or even better, we'll do other kinds of removal and spend less than $600. Um, for steel companies, it's going to be a little harder. People don't really have this in their minds. Steel companies have very tiny margins. They're
Yeah.
globally traded commodities. It's super hard to remove and reduce the emissions. They are 8% of global emissions. Steel is more than cars. Steel is basically more than cars plus aviation. So, like when you put those numbers together, it's like, well, how do you actually do it? They're gonna have to do some removals and they know it.
Yeah.
But who's going to pay them to do that? Who's going to mandate them to do that? They just can't start doing that on their own nickel. If they do, they will get pushed out of the market immediately on cost. So they have a very tricky thing to manage. They understand that they want help choosing the good stuff and planning for the right future.
Given that, what role should government play in accelerating carbon removal deployment? What kinds of incentives can we put in place, whether those are carrots or sticks?
Sure. So let's start by the easy stuff. They should actually set targets for removals the same way they set targets for everybody else.
Hmm.
They have clean power targets? Great. They should have clean steel targets. We will buy a certain amount of clean
Yeah.
steel, and this is the date. By 2040, 10% of the steel in the world must be clean. And they have a real lever on this as governments. Governments buy 20% of the steel in the world. They buy 50% of the concrete in the world. If they set a clean standard, they can pay for it because it's their business, actually. And having that clear signal, date certain, volume certain, will help. The same way that renewable portfolio standards worked Clean buying standards can help. Um, they can also just start paying money. Governments can do what they do for everything else. They buy paper clips. Okay, great. We'll buy CO2 removal because this is part of our
Mhm.
net zero commitment, right? And we're seeing that happen in Canada, in the United States. It started in California. This is the bill they're discussing. But in parts of Europe, they're digging in and saying, all right, well, I guess, what is it? The UK just announced they're going to do a 50 million pound purchase or something like that. Like, okay, well, that's a good start. Like, that sends clarity to the market that helps these companies. They also can work with regulatory and standard bodies like the International Maritime Organization and say, hey, if everybody knows that we need to have a certain amount of carbon footprint by 2035, the whole world is buying that same standard, everyone's got it to you. And how do we then compete as a
Mhm.
nation? If we're Denmark, we want to make clean fuels. If we're Indonesia, we want to make clean fuels. And we can also offer removals as part of that package.
You also mentioned environmental justice a few moments ago. And let's take sustainable aviation fuel. About 40% of the corn grown in the United States goes to creating ethanol
Mhm.
rather than feeding people. How do you, as Carbon Direct, advise companies to think about those kinds of trade-offs between human impact and climate impact?
Sure. So let's start by saying we live in a world of abundance.
Hmm.
We actually have abundant energy. We have abundant food. We have abundant money. The discussion around ethanol and feeding people is the wrong discussion.
Okay, what's the right
So,
one?
well, no, but I mean, if there are people who are hungry, it's not because we're growing corn for fuel. Like that's not the reason people,
Absolutely. Given
right?
our ability
But
to
but
deploy
I
what
want
we
to
have is very limited.
Well, sure, but I do want to focus on your question of justice. Like, how do you think about these trade-offs for real? Because there are real
Hmm.
issues in this. Um, we've created this unfortunate term, environmental sacrifice zone. It's real. We got to do this. We have chlorine tanks in California. Like, they have to go somewhere. Like,
Yeah.
that's an environmental sacrifice zone. But you really don't want frontline communities, uh, groups, disadvantaged minorities. Like, you don't want these groups to pay an undue environmental burden. That's just wrong, right? And we have an environmental justice practice. We also think that we have to build our way to the future we want. If we want
Hmm.
sustainable aviation fuel, we're going to need a bunch of sustainable aviation fuel plants. We're going to need more sugarcane ethanol, corn ethanol. We're going to need a bunch of stuff. We're going to need turn waste like garbage into jet fuel. Like we're going to need some kind of harsh supply chains to make that happen. That's true on the supply side and on the manufacturing side. Those things end up in communities always.
Hmm.
So you need a practice that engages communities and said, what do you really care about? What is okay and what's not okay? How can we help you get to yes? How do we know when to cut bait because you say no? These are nuanced discussions. This is not cookie cutter, like go through it and answer it. And frankly, we need to get away from a litigious sensibility around this and start thinking about how do we build together. Generosity is what's going to deliver the future we want. Cooperation is going to deliver the future we want. We are not going to litigate and shame our way to zero. We need a community of people who build things.
I hope people take that to heart. Given what you just said, what is your advice to a business leader or a policymaker or even an individual listening to this show that wants to contribute to scaling carbon removal solutions fast? What should they do?
Uh, a handful of things. First of all, acknowledge that it's got to be done. There's still a huge industry out there of people who just say, like, it's a moral hazard, we should never do it. No, the science is pretty clear. We cannot balance the climate books without huge amounts of CO2 removal. And you
Hmm.
don't get to pick your favorite one and declare it like the only thing we need to do.
Yeah.
Just like everything else, in different markets and different ecosystems, we're going to need lots of different stuff. So acknowledge that you need it and keep an open mind about what you got to do. Second thing, there's no reason not to be educated on this topic. You have the entire world's database at your fingertips, literally. And don't just go to the clickbait. Take a little time, educate yourself on what carbon dioxide removal is and isn't. Okay? It is not actually a ploy by oil companies to destroy the world. It is not that. Like,
Yeah.
educate yourself a little bit. Third thing, And this is the easiest part. Start talking about it. If you're in civil society, be civil about it. I've heard about CO2 removal. What do you guys think? What do you know? Like, start the conversations going. And if you're a company, educate yourself is job one, because you're going to be spending money on this for sure. There is no world in which you are not spending money on this. So you want to spend money well. Like any other corporate engagement, you want to spend that money well. Learn what's reasonable. Decide what your policies should be. Figure out what's good. It sounds simple, but it's not, and it takes time and effort. I've been surprised a lot of companies who come to us, they're like, "Oh, our whole sustainability desk is two people."
Hmm.
It's a big company. It's like a half a billion dollar or $20 billion company, but they're like, our sustainability desk is two people and they do water, they do trash, they do supply chains, they do all this stuff. Like, so you're going to have to staff up. You're going to have to spend money to educate yourself, training sessions, hiring people, investing in whatever you need to do to learn.
Well, one of the ways they can keep up is with Carbon Direct. How can folks follow your work and learn from what you're discovering in your process as well?
That's my second favorite question. Thank you. I'm pleased to say that we have improved our website so it is easier to figure out what we do. One of the first things you can do, of course, is subscribe to our newsletter, and you will get information in your inbox. It tells you recent blogs, what's a big report, when we have one of these major things coming out, if we're doing a webinar, what is latest on our website. You can find all that in our subscription newsletter. You can also just regularly go there. We have a page that's called Carbon Direct slash Insights. If you
Mhm.
go to the Insights page, every time we put out a blog or a report or a position piece, you can figure out something there that's useful. It could be on policy, it could be on a specific kind of pathway like biochar, direct air capture. It could be on what is quality. It could be on
Mhm.
environmental justice. And we have all of these things on our website. We'd encourage people to go there. We've tried to make it easy. For every big honking report, there's always a 700-word blog. So people can just be like, what am I really trying to figure out and how do I learn about it?
Pick which big honkin' report you want to really dig into. And I think that's the right way to, as we were talking about before, surface the information in a way that becomes consumable, but then give people the direct access to learn the deep knowledge that they need to understand if they want to go deep.
Exactly. So if you want to read the 35-page report that we did on what is high quality criteria, you can do that. If you want to read the guidelines for sustainable biomass harvesting, we got that. If you want to read our big report on sustainable aviation fuels or natural gas with carbon capture, we got these things. So you can choose like, well, do I want to learn this topic or not? But that's up to you because everyone's not going to know everything. I'm pretty smart, but I'm not as smart as the whole earth. So like it is worth like figuring out where you want to actually learn something and then take a little time.
Well, we all have the choice to take those steps or not, and I hope we all do. Julio, thanks so much for spending time with us today. It's been fascinating.
Mitch, it was a real joy. Thank you again.
You've been listening to my conversation with Dr. Julio Friedmann, Chief Scientist at the carbon management company Carbon Direct. And you can learn more about their work and dig into that library of reports that they publish at carbon-direct.com. That's carbon-direct.com, not one word with no space, no dash. Julio's comment that the question is who will pay for cleaning up the atmospheric mess created by 250 years of extractive industrial activity and the single-use society it has produced in the early 21st century is precisely what we need to be asking right now. Unfortunately, the federal government is plugging its ears, looking away, and jabbering nya 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 whenever the issue of climate is raised. And to echo Julio again, the first step toward climate progress is to acknowledge that the job needs doing. That's a scientific, not a religious position. But back to the question, who's going to pay for carbon removal? And the answer is all of us. And if not us, our children, our grandchildren, and if there are future generations after that with the capacity to earn in a scorching hot world, those people that we call our future are going to pay our bills. So let's have the buck stop with the generations living right now. By tackling the challenge together with transparent, science based, but easily understood data about the environmental impact of products and services, each of us can make decisions that contribute to progress. Look, let's take the Republican Party at their word and value markets. Markets, which are the most effective mechanism for exerting our influence at a time when gerrymandering and censorship characterize our politics, depend on complete and accurate information. We should reinforce regulations that require clean air and set goals as a country and as individual states if the feds won't step up. But we can't do any of that if we don't actually have the data and can understand and trust it. Carbon removal is at that awkward early teenage stage when it must try so many things and it's going to make a lot of mistakes. Taking an adversarial approach to the companies and nonprofits trying to make a positive difference can be counterproductive at a time when early experiments have begun to provide a path, albeit an expensive one, out of the crisis. Let's get more information out there. Today was the first time that I've heard, during more than a half dozen conversations on the show about enhanced rock weathering, that the chemical and crystalline structure of basalt impacts the efficacy of this carbon removal strategy. But were the earlier guests oversimplifying claims or just lying about enhanced rock weathering's efficacy, saying that basalt works? No. The first time that research was published was in Applied Geochemistry in 2021, and the insights into a wider variety of basalt types appeared only just this year in the journal Energies. So we're still just learning how to repair our environment. We must embrace being a learning society together, and that will give us the path out of the climate crisis. So we'll continue to share what we learn here, and please stay tuned. And would you take a moment to consider any of the more than 500 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear to share with friends or your family? Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us, folks. You're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell your friends, your family, your coworkers, the people you meet on the street that they can find Sustainability in Your Ear on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness that they prefer. Thank you, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.